Welcome back to Telegeography Explains the Internet, a show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, as always, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Fahim Sabir. He's Director of Digital Solutions at Colt. Fahim joined me to bring clarity to the sometimes confusing, at least to me certainly, world of network as a service. So we started out naturally with his current definition of NaaS, because that kind of has been a moving target in the past couple of years, and why he thinks NaaS is so important in the market right now. We talk about the back end as well, some of the carrier ecosystem and the goals that they need to accomplish there to make the customer-facing NaaS a full reality. And of course, it's 2025, so we have to talk about AI, not just because it's a current hot topic, but also because we wanted to explore how these topics of NaaS and AI might be linked. And finally, we get Fahim's insights on what needs to happen for NaaS to achieve that kind of broader adoption in the enterprise networking space that I think a lot of folks have been looking for. As always, if you enjoy the show, please subscribe and make sure you get episodes as soon as we have them out, which is some Thursdays, not every Thursday, unfortunately. We don't have time for that, but many Thursdays. And if you're so moved, we greatly appreciate any ratings or feedback you have. I should say, never hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever you can find me. I love talking to listeners about what they want to hear or who I should talk to, or just some feedback on what we hit. So please enjoy the show. Okay, so finally, welcome to the show, Fahim. We've been trying to get this together for like a year and a half or so, so I'm really glad we finally made it work.
Yeah, it's been a long time, Greg. Hi, and thank you for finally making this happen.
Absolutely, yeah, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, and also before we start, I got to get out of the way that you have one of the same afflictions as me, as being a man of two first names, right? So,
That's it. That's it. People don't know what to call me, to be quite honest. I've
yeah.
had both of them on emails, which is quite
I,
irritating at
I
times.
have
But
absolutely had that before, where someone will call me Brian in one sentence and Greg in the next.
exactly,
Absolutely.
exactly. I'm glad I'm not
Awesome.
alone.
So Fahim, let's start out, as I always do, with just a brief background on you and what you do at Colt.
Yeah, so obviously, working at Colt, 17 years now, I think. So
Wow.
been
Yeah.
around the block in Colt. My background is all within more in the IT space rather than the
Hmm.
network space. So yeah, I mean, I joined Colt in 2007 as an enterprise architect. Did some rounds learning about and sort of developing architectures around our service delivery infrastructure and systems, and also got given a project in 2007 about delivering automation of our delivery,
Hmm.
which was a massive failure, to be honest with you.
Well, that was
But
a
we'll get
long
into
time
that a little
ago
bit
for
later.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
I'm
yeah.
sure we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Since then, I also spent a stint running architecture and also for a while engineering within our managed cloud business, which we divested since, and then took on the topic of NaaS. Ran that for a good few years, and now I'm running digital at Colt.
Hmm. Hmm. Excellent. Well, so that's exactly what we're going to talk about. So that's why I wanted to have you on the show, and it's interesting because more or less when I first talked to you about this a long time ago, it was going to be a similar topic, which is to say, just the state of the NaaS kind of market. However, the ground has moved underneath us a lot in that intervening time. So I'm glad that we're doing this now, actually, because things have, I think, gotten really interesting. So I wanted to start out with just your definition of NaaS as it is right now in Q1 2025, and then maybe even like contrast that or compare it or align it with what what some others are defining NaaS as in the present day.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, Greg, 18 months is a very, very long time, and a lot can
Hmm.
happen in that time. A lot has happened. So yeah, I mean, basically, we started with NaaS basically representing what I would describe as a cloud-like experience for a network. So I
Hmm.
mean, the initial sort of set of slides we took around our organization and also to some of our customers basically said, if I order from Amazon, I can get my delivery within an hour. If I order from Uber, basically I can get my taxi within minutes. I don't have to talk to anybody, don't have to do anything. It just all happens digitally. Why? Or if I want to stand up a virtual machine, then I go onto AWS, I go onto Google, Azure, whatever my poison is when it comes to cloud provider. Why does it take so much time to get a
Hmm.
telco service? Yeah,
Right.
so it was all about kind of delivering a step change in that, and it's always been uh, a user experience conversation. It's never
Hmm.
quite, before I'm sure we'll get onto it later, automation was all around driving operational improvement and cost reduction.
Hmm.
But NaaS has always been around the customer experience, the easy button, if you
Right.
like, of
Right.
basically making it much easier to deliver services, but also taking on those cloud-like paradigms of automated delivery and having an API front end and a portal and a ton of self-service and a lot of control yourself and various other elements to that as well. So
Hmm.
that's kind of I think that broadly aligns with some of the definitions that there are in the industry. I think Meth has done some really really good
Absolutely.
work in this space to try to basically try to normalize that definition so everyone can basically compare stuff between the different providers. But then NaaS still means a lot of different things. There's still lots of vendors selling network equipment under the NaaS banner. People talk about campus NaaS, which, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what that means at the moment.
Right.
It's been on my to-do list to read about for quite some time. And yeah, there's definitely other things, and people are still sort of painting you know, uh, older stuff like wide area networks, whereby things can
Hmm.
happen, at relatively reasonable speed as NAS as well. Certain sort of operators are also doing that.
Right.
So there's also a bit of NAS washing, if you like, that's
Hmm.
currently happening.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not unlike SD-WAN 6 or 7 years ago, where anything that improved WAN functions, was relabeled as SD-WAN. But I also see there's a almost like a kind of mission creep in a sense, which is so I like the way that you phrase it. It's interesting that, like, okay, we can consume all of these other things digitally in this way. Why can't we consume network? And there's a part of me that it's like, of course, that's the model we've been moving towards the industry, and that there's another aspect of that, though, that it's, well, a network is infrastructure, right? So there is no other infrastructure service in the world really that is delivered in the same way necessarily, unless you count infrastructure as a service in the cloud sense, right? But I think that's always been that sort of like thing overhanging the industry, that we want to push more towards this digital experience, but there is still this like physical infrastructure factor to overcome, right? So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah, and this is kind of where we really differ from the cloud, right? I mean, cloud
right.
is like this big amorphous amount of infrastructure in a highly
Hmm.
sort of centralized location.
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
put up 20,000, 30,000, 40, however many, tens
Right.
of thousands or hundreds of thousands of servers in a single location, and everybody can basically use those. Whereas,
Right.
like you say, there is a highly physical element to network delivery. There is nobody in the world that's putting fiber to every single location or will ever put fiber to every
Right.
single location, because there's nobody who's rich enough to be able to do
Yeah,
that.
it's like, and
Mainly more
it
than
would be
anything
the
else.
biggest economic blunder in the history of the world if you chose to do that
Absolutely.
too. So like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. But I mean, things are, there was a big sort of question mark. And recently, if you looked at sort of the original sort of NAS services that existed, they were all very sort of data center centric, cloud centric,
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
terms of connectivity, internet centric as well. Because you
Hmm.
could basically deploy sort of super dense infrastructure deployments in those locations, and then
Right.
because they were pretty hot in terms of locations, then you know you could do that in an economic way by putting in tens, hundreds, possibly even thousands of ports because you knew there were going to be customers that actually land there. I think there's now kind of this little bit of a movement, although it's not really pervasive as such. Yeah, around kind of starting to connect other locations, which actually do require, some sort of truck roll, some sort of dig, some
Hmm.
sort of actual physical equipment installation. But I mean, there certainly are elements of that. But when we've started, and I think the principle is still the same, is ask yourself the question: how do you actually minimize the amount of infrastructure that you have to deploy,
Right.
such that you can still deliver a service which has some value added components in such a way that I don't have to send out somebody to the customer's site when the customer decides they now want a firewall. I don't
Hmm.
have to send somebody out with a firewall box. Our approach was always our presentation should simply be a layer 2 NID, and
Hmm.
everything else should happen in the network.
Right. Hmm.
Now, the reality is things have changed somewhat because, and maybe it's something that we should talk about a little bit more is you know, when the whole sort of when all of this stuff started, when all of the sort of main players in this space actually, started doing their work, that was before COVID. And
Hmm.
COVID completely changed the world. I don't know
Right.
about you, but I had the option of working from home
I'm home
every
right
well
now. Yep.
as
Hmm.
as often as I like. I mean, Colt's pretty cool with their policy with regards to
Right.
that. And well, the question I would ask is, uh, what does NaaS do for me as somebody who's working at home? I get it for the
Hmm.
for the enterprise building, I get it for
Right.
the data center, the cloud, and all the other bits and pieces. But what does it actually do for me? What does it do for us remote workers?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and in that sense, right? Anything that it does do conceivably has to be over the top because the carrier nor the enterprise own your physical infrastructure, right? So I think that
Absolutely.
that has made all of that much more complicated. But going back, Fahim, to something that you sort of mentioned, that early use case of NaaS was so kind of obvious. Where do we over provision sufficiently to have on demand? It's between data centers, right? And that market developed, and you have all of the fabrics of the world and all that sort of thing, and those enterprises who need it adopted it. It's still pretty small, but it feels like now NaaS is possibly important again, but in a different context. So in your view, maybe what's bringing NaaS back to the forefront in that sense now?
Well, I think the movement of people more than anything else, and not
Hmm.
just that, but the movement of data has jumped quite a lot, and we I guess we can't have any conversation that's of any sort of substance these days without mentioning AI.
Hmm.
The amount of processing that needs to happen, and the such like, and I think those two things are now starting to really become important, along with also the green agenda as well. Ultimately,
Hmm.
we have to somehow figure out how we are more efficient from an operational point of view to make sure that we are, you know, not harming the planet
Right.
unnecessarily, and also, yeah, and also there is all that also that underlying thing about as an enterprise, I also need to manage cost. But I think all of these things kind of sort of coalesce around this whole idea of having this highly automated, highly flexible environment that I can do what I want with. Whenever I want and
Hmm.
however I want, and then manage all of those different elements.
No, that's a great point. Is that back to sort of the infrastructure point? The traditional WAN was a very rigid infrastructure. It wasn't efficient, right? It wasn't necessarily right sized. It was like the old kind of if you ask a WAN manager how did you determine how much bandwidth you need provision at each office, it's like, guess and then wait for people to complain at that office, and you know what I mean. So moving towards this like efficiency, I think like you mentioned has reverberations in many directions, right? Um,
Yeah,
but in the end, that is still a tough nut to crack, right? And one of the reasons, right, is that it's all well and good, I think, to talk about this is NaaS that we're going to present to the enterprise customer, the cool things that they can do. But then I, as a carrier on my back end, on my OSS and BSS and whatnot, have to have that all set up across the whole carrier ecosystem unless I only want to offer this kind of service to my on net customers, which almost no customer is going to be completely on net for any carrier, right? So to formulate that in a question, right? So when we're looking at operators, offering NaaS to an enterprise, how do they have to work on the back end to have the OSS BSS be able to support that across their carrier ecosystem?
So kind of to me, it kind of feels like we're in a bit of an early EV sort of moment at the moment. So it's electric
Mm.
vehicles.
Hmm.
Effectively, what you had is you had the new entrants who came in and designed electric vehicles from scratch.
Right.
They did the right thing. They put a motor on each wheel. They put the battery across the floor plan. And they built on top of it. And literally, they had no real reason to have an engine bay as such,
Hmm.
other than I guess for historic reasons, a car looks a bit weird if it doesn't have that
Right.
that shape at the
Yeah.
front of it. And then you had the traditional manufacturers, who've been in the sort of the combustion engine game for a very long time. And
Right.
what did they do? They literally lifted out the combustion engine. They put electric motor in there instead. And so,
Right.
we've got electric cars now.
Hmm.
Those are two very different approaches to actually building one. I think the majority of the OSS BSS market is still basically the old combustion engine manufacturers that basically put an electric motor
Hmm.
into their platforms. And what I've seen so far is anybody who has a credible NaaS offering has literally built it from the ground up themselves. Like a
Hmm.
lot of engineering time has gone into. I mean, this is certainly the case for Colt. I'm pretty convinced, although I haven't really asked the question to everyone that's out there, that they've done exactly the same thing.
Hmm.
From an OSS point of view, I think we're generally okay. I think the OSS platforms we have in place are pretty good. At least the
Hmm.
the more recent ones are. But from a BSS space, the there's a lot of legacy that's still there, and
Right.
a lot of different ideas. And I'll give you an example. And I talk about this quite a lot, but I sometimes get an argument. Well, isn't that just nuance? When we were building our NaaS platform, we decided not to call everything that went through our system an order,
Mm.
because
Okay.
orders have very, very specific connotations in the telco
Right.
world in terms of the processing, in terms of how they relate to contracts and all those sorts of things. We called it a request instead. And yeah, it
Right.
might well be semantics, right? I mean, a
Right. Yeah.
request and order is the same thing,
Well, if it's
but
the name of a field in your API call, that matters, right? You know what I mean? So yeah, yeah.
exactly, exactly. But it's about trying to get away from the old way of doing things. And
Hmm.
I think that there certainly is an opportunity for a BSS a BSS vendor who wants to kind of start to, take advantage of this wave. That they're also, they should be thinking about it, because I think it's a big deal, and it is so
Yeah.
fundamentally different to what they're doing at the moment, that it's not just a case of it is just what we've always done, but with an automation and a portal slant to it. It's not that. It's a lot more than that.
Right. Right. And the problem there from your standpoint as a carrier offering NAS to the enterprise is that that's not there yet, right? It's going to take a long time. It strikes me for there's the MEF working on this, and there's the MEF members that are still having to hash this out. But then there's a long tail of providers that aren't in MEF and maybe aren't even thinking about this yet. That it's going to, seems to me, take a really long time to get through that whole thing, right? So you're saying better opportunity from just like a BSS vendor out there that could gain market share with everybody and have done this work itself, basically.
I think it's a distinct possibility.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
from our perspective at Colt, we built a lot of this stuff from scratch because it just didn't exist in the market when we
Right.
when we scanned for the market at that time. And I don't think that the market has moved on a whole lot since.
Hmm.
I mean,
Well,
there's a
so
lot cooler network technology out there than there was
right.
when we started, but yeah, that's a different matter.
So for everybody listening, if you have these skills and are tired of where you're working, go do a startup. That's maybe a good opportunity. You just got a free idea, right? Yeah.
There you
Well,
go.
I think also then within the carrier perspective, you need to think right about how to make this happen, right? So you guys have worked on this on your own, sort of built it from the ground up. What about the thing that we hear across the industry all the time in that sense is the skills gap with all of these changes, right? So you have so many engineers used to doing networking a certain way, and that's on both the end user side as well, right? And we're having the industry move in these kind of radical new ways of doing this. Does that create a problem for finding folks who can even work on this stuff?
I think it does create a little bit of a problem. So, I've been really fortunate in the fact that I came from the IT space. I
Hmm.
have, through my career, learned a little bit about network. I'm very much in the enough to be dangerous, not enough to be useful sort of
Right.
category.
Right.
And also, also learning about cloud through my experience there is
Mm.
kind of gave me a quite a unique blend of experiences. And, there are other people, there are a good number of people out there that are like that, but there aren't nearly enough.
Right.
You've got people that come from a sort of a hardcore software development background, building sort of business applications and the such. Like you've got network engineers who really understand networks, but they're that sort of middle spectrum, if you like,
Right.
from the people that are IT people that understand network through to network people that understand automation. It's still pretty narrow at the moment, and
Hmm.
I think that there's some work to do for the industry to educate people to help them
Right.
learn about this stuff. And you know, I think the people are there, and I think the intelligence is definitely there. The world is full of
Hmm.
smart people in this
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah.
It's just about encouragement and training more than anything else. And it's that is something that there needs to be a whole lot more of.
It's interesting the way that you put that. I've had lots of industry conversations about the skills gap and this, sort of complaint that within electrical engineering and computer science programs in university, there's not that big of a networking presence often. But just the other day, I heard in a conversation about AI specifically, someone kind of mentioned that the way that we think about skills and careers is going to flip, right? That the old way of thinking was, oh, I go to university and I acquire a set of skills, and then I go market myself to employers, and they hire me for those skills. Whereas now it's kind of going to be flipped, where it's like, okay, you need some background and some foundation, but that you're going to be constantly sort of downloading new skills as a career person, right? Rather than having uploaded early on and then market those out. You're going to have, so it strikes me very much in this case. You have networking people that need to learn the IT side, and IT side that needs to happen in the security space with SASE as well,
Well, yeah,
right?
there's
So
also that dimension as well. Yeah, both sides need
mhm.
to learn security, and security guys need to learn about the other two sides as well. So, yeah, we're going to end up with this interesting mesh in the future.
Mhm.
I think that basically there is, that specialism is going to somewhat sort of dampen a little bit.
Right.
Because I just think that you're going to need quite a broad range of skills that you've not needed in the past. You've basically been able to hide in your corner, so to speak, and do your
Mhm.
little thing. Whereas now it's time to, take a step towards the middle of the room, so to speak. So
Yeah, which
yeah,
is exciting but
it's
scary for some people, I reckon, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. But that's why we do the job that we do, especially technical
Right.
people, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's a lifelong exercise in learning. It's just the way that we're technical people are generally built. So
Right.
I'm optimistic. It's just more about the encouragement and just making sure they've got the environment to grow and to develop in those areas. Because there's always that
Yeah.
sort of overhead of you know we have to cut down cost, we have to become more
Hmm.
productive. We've got to do
Right.
all of these things, but yeah, I mean, it's about finding that balance.
No, that's well, maybe another startup idea is like, I'm sure that this exists out there actually already in some forms, but easily digestible, upskilling for network professionals, right? I think would be
That's it. That's it.
very useful. Yeah.
And if I find such a startup, I'm definitely
Yeah.
sending them an invoice for this conversation. Just
Yeah,
to,
that's right. Yeah. Too many free ideas we're giving out here.
that's it.
All right. So given all of this, right, the complexity of the problem, what do you think it's going to take for NaaS to really take off in the market. So our conversations before, we've talked about how enterprise uptake of NaaS is still pretty low. Like I said, mostly those use cases of like the types of verticals that have really bursty traffic between their data centers. But to this broader NaaS vision that the industry has and that you have, how are we going to get that off the ground?
Well, I mean, I think that the problem is there is at the moment it's very much in pockets, and we
Hmm.
need we need breadth of coverage first. The reality is, enterprises are, multinational. They're dotted all over the place. They can't generally be served by one
Right.
network provider, let alone one NaaS provider. So we need to get more NaaS providers in place. We need to make sure that there's integration available so we can do what is colloquially in Colt being referred to as NaaS to NaaS integration,
Mm.
which effectively means sort of full end-to-end automation across networks on a real-time basis. I
Mm.
think to be quite honest, I think that the bursty traffic thing is really interesting because I think bursty traffic is coming back. It's
Mm. Good point.
what can I say? It's it's a trend that's going to come back because of the amount of data that we're going to see around AI. And to be quite honest, I think IoT is going to make a comeback as a result of AI and bursty
Mm.
traffic as well.
Hmm.
And yeah, that to me is really interesting. But like I said before, yeah, the other thing is we need to figure out how we're going to support the people that are kind of remote as well,
Right.
away from the NAS, but yet are able to connect to it, contribute to the work that's actually happening there. And
Hmm.
and, and to me, that there's kind of two types. If you look at telcos, we effectively have two types of customers. We have what I refer to as builders, and we've got buyers. Right, so
Mm-hmm.
builders are basically the people, they take all the different components, they build something themselves. Yeah, large enterprises, highly capable network organizations within them, or even better sort of DevSec NetOps types organizations,
Right.
who are actually there and can build their own thing. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is the buyers, and the buyers are literally like you know let's take for example a legal firm that has several offices. They they just want a network that works, right?
Right.
And this is why things like SD-WAN have come along and the such like. So I think that the other thing that's kind of missing at the moment is, just like if you go to cloud and infrastructure as a service, software as a service, etc., you can buy a consultancy service that effectively will run your cloud for you. I think that
Hmm.
basically, I think the same thing needs to exist in the NAS space as well, in order for kind of that enterprise adoption, because 90% of enterprises don't want to worry about their network. They just need a
Right.
network that works. you know
Yeah.
if
Even the
they don't.
network manager doesn't want to think about the network. He has enough.
Yeah,
They have enough to focus on without having to do a lot of that work.
yeah,
And
exactly.
definitely to your point, so many of those teams, even at very large multinationals, are small, very small. So
Yeah, yeah. So then, yeah, that's what we found. Those are the two conversations. The reality is, for the builders, where I think that there needs to be a broader portfolio available to them, and
hmm.
specifically kind of walking towards the SD-WAN, SASE, and the
Right.
entire alphabet soup that's happening over there.
Hmm.
And then you've also got for the builders, it's all about basically how do you overlay a service towards them that gives them the power and the flexibility of
Hmm.
NAS, but within guardrails such that the organisation that's actually selling it to them is actually able to guarantee a level of service as per the contract that they've signed with them. So, I think there are definitely directions to go
Hmm.
in that respect.
Now that's really interesting. It almost strikes me that it could be that having the builders as a customer is more difficult in some respects than just someone who comes to you looking for a solution. You have consultants that work only for that company, figured out their whole network. Whereas with the builders, it's like they're using some of the same tools that carriers are using in the kind of wholesale market, if you will, right? And then finding that balance of what level of management is appropriate for someone who sorting all of that out. I think might be more complicated than just doing it for them, right? So
Yeah, and there's a couple of really interesting sort of facets to that because if you compare us to, let's say, for example, the infrastructure as a service industry, if
Hmm.
I go to, let's say, for example, my infrastructure as a service provider of choice, pick your own poison, whichever one
Right.
you want to use, I can actually pull up an infrastructure that does not work,
Right.
because I've
Right.
broken it, I've done something wrong.
Hmm.
And if I call up my provider, they'll be like, so fix it. There's nothing wrong with our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is working fine. The servers
Right.
are up. Everything. The network's working. This is not a us problem. This is a you problem.
Hmm.
Go fix it. Whereas network providers have a very very different view of the world, and I've always wondered why this is the case. It's if a customer calls us up, it's like it becomes our responsibility to fix the issue, no matter what
Right.
the issue is, to the point whereby, well, I mean, to a limit. If
Hmm.
I break my router on my broadband connection, my provider will not help me.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but even if I don't use my own router, they'll make sure I plug in their router so that
Right.
basically they know the device that they're actually dealing with. But yeah, there is a real element to that, and this is the debate that we've had internally within Colt. Where does our responsibility for fixing stuff stop? Because one of the sort of the key areas of, let's say, for example, NaaS is you know taking your products, highly componentize them, and I guess this is one of the principles: highly componentizing your products so that basically your customers can put together whatever they want to, like a cloud environment. Attach as much storage, attach the machines that I want to attach together. The cloud providers didn't sell a web hosting stack. They just
Hmm.
sold you a pile of virtual machines, some networks, some storage, and that's why you've had some really interesting use cases come out of cloud that none of the cloud providers possibly could have predicted.
Right.
Now, if you
Right.
want to kind of mimic that behavior in the network space, you also have to equally as componentize your network, but then you're kind of opening yourself up for somebody to build something that doesn't work. And then the question is,
Right.
well, actually, whose
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 fault is
whose
that then?
problem does
Right.
that become? Yeah, who's
Yeah.
responsible for fixing it? And historically, for network service providers, it's always been the provider.
Hmm.
It's because, I guess it's because of the physical element or something else, but
Hmm.
it's always been the network provider. And I wonder if that needs to shift a little bit
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
result of this move. And then, I guess builders, you just have to trust the fact they're not going to break stuff.
Right.
I guess it's really just that.
Yeah, if you buy the sandbox service and your castle falls down, that's kind of on you, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Probably
yeah,
should have made thicker walls.
right,
So yeah, I mean, no,
exactly.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, definitely.
Excellent. All right, so Fahim, it's 2025, and we're almost like contractually obligated to talk about AI now. So,
Okay.
we
Yeah, let's
we
do
pretty much
that.
have to do that, right? And so, I we only have whatever sort of 15 or so minutes left, right? But so this topic is a lot to bring up with that amount of time left. But I want to start with just AI and its impact maybe on how we're thinking about NaaS, how we're setting NaaS to market in that specific sense, not to just bring up AI in general and all the impacts it might have on telecom, but where do you see AI impacting the NaaS conversation, as it were?
Yeah, in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's start to unpack this. So, I mean, first of all, just in terms of the actual service we provide, AI relies on a ton of data. We
Mm-hmm.
went through the whole phase of shunting data around for analytics and for creating our data lakes and doing all of the stuff that we did. But now the amount of data that we need to be able to process kind of jumps up quite significantly, and the amount of data we produce as a result of processing that stuff jumps around
Right.
pretty significantly. And you can't have a network which has like fat pipes that are going between every single location in a big mesh. So it's conceivable that as data moves around the network, you need a network that's flexible enough to be able to expand and contract in order to be able to deal with those demands of that
Right.
movement. So I think NAS has got a real sort of an important element there, and especially
Mm-hmm.
not just the automation of the network, but the automation of the NAS. So the automation that the
Mm.
enterprise does of the platform is equally as important, because they need to be able to also do those things. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, so there's that. one element. There's another element that a big part of NaaS is on ramping onto lots of different cloud providers. And the question that I have in my mind is there going to be any sort of new sort of specific clouds that come along, and we've seen some.
Hmm.
We'll see if they actually make an impact on the actual market, which are effectively, very, very specialized GPU centric clouds.
Right.
And, on ramping onto those is going to become a really, really important topic at
Hmm.
some point as well. And then to me, there is also like kind of the third element, which is all around, much more at the network layer, self-optimizing networks and what they mean from a NAS point of view, recommendation engines, hi Fahim, you're using 3 times as much bandwidth as you're paying for at the moment. Well, you need
Right.
3 times as much bandwidth as you're paying for at the moment.
Hmm.
Would you go and like spend a whole bunch more money and get more bandwidth? So yeah, there is that, or you need less over there, or whatever the important stuff
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
around that space. So they, I mean, I think those are kind of the key areas.
Yeah, that last one I think is particularly interesting, right? So that only with the NAS vision that we have in place, then you can sort of have it also the AI element sort of utilizing your NAS capabilities most efficiently, right? So, like
Yeah,
previously
absolutely.
thinking about it would still require a network manager to say, "Oh, our traffic is really bursty because of X, Y, and Z." Possibly because of AI and IoT, right? But yeah, it seems like there is this very recursive relationship. So it's AI feeding into NAS, NAS feeding into AI, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. We've done proof of concepts in this area at Colt, whereby effectively, yeah, we've used, I mean, machine learning to try to figure out traffic patterns and then sort of predict when changes should be made to the network in order to basically be able to deal with those traffic patterns. So,
Hmm.
if you find out that basically, at 4:30, everyone's on the internet trying to figure out whether or not their commute home is going to be really, really painful
Right.
versus, sort of midnight where there are less people, kind of working, and that sort of these sorts of use cases are really, it's kind of where I see things going. But in
Hmm.
order to do that, what you need to be able to do is you need a set of, well, and then this is I guess, a plug for the MEF as well. We need a set of standard and highly standardized APIs in order for that control to be developed in a way that's pervasive, like we're seeing, in, let's say, for example, in the Kamara project space, in the
Hmm.
mobile network, whereby effectively you
Hmm.
have a standard gateway that everything can talk to. Doesn't matter if I'm a customer of one network or another. I think we need to see the same level of standardization actually appear in the NAS space as well, because then I can write software to control one NAS and then make sure that it can control any NAS without having to reintegrate it because I've decided to move provider.
Yeah, or move provider, or something that comes up often is M&A activity, and this was important in
For
the
sure.
SD-WAN space the last few years. If get
Yeah, yeah.
all of a sudden I have to onboard 30 sites that are using a completely different SD-WAN, and how do I harmonize that? And it's not easy, right? It's
No, no,
yeah,
unless you want to
yeah,
interrupt. Yeah, maybe we'll eventually get around to that topic.
yeah,
It's a
exactly,
it's a bit of a painful one still.
yeah, yeah. And so thinking back to the sort of build, builders versus buyers kind of thing, I think that's also really impactful in the network automation sense as well, right? That there are going to be builders tinkering with automation tools on their own and that sort of thing. Most folks are probably going to be in the buyer side waiting for the carriers to, as you just said, sort of working on like proof of concept in house. How do you see that balance out, like in terms of you offering these automation tools to a customer as a solution versus being a platform to, again, let the customers kind of figure it out?
So I mean, that's actually a really, really good question. I personally believe that we should not operate on that, on the, we're going to offer automation tools to
Hmm.
to our
Hmm.
customers. I think that, it's well, maybe it's not entirely the case. So let's think this one through a little bit.
Yeah, no worries.
The I think the whole API conversation starts to become really, really important again in
Mm,
this, right? So, I can give you one example of a specific customer that we were talking to and became a customer of the service at Colt. So they were a retail organization
mhm.
who have a quite significant web presence. Obviously, I can't give you any names on this. So, but
We
what they
can
were doing
imagine
is
from there. Yeah. Yeah.
whenever they had a development project, they would want to stand up a VPC, build connectivity to that VPC, do their
Hmm.
project, eventually move the thing into production, and then effectively tear the whole thing down. And the way they would do
Hmm.
this is by going into a service request system, so like a Service Now, Remedy, BMC Remedy, or some other service request system. Literally place a request. That request got authorized, and then boom, the whole automation ran to uh, do all of that stuff to actually set that environment up, and then afterwards, or maybe even on an automated basis, after a period of time, the whole thing would just get torn down again. And
Mm.
that would involve programming, their cloud provider, standing up all of the bits and pieces there, involve programming the network, i.e., us, their own internal network, and any other bits and pieces, firewalls, etc. And for me, the interesting thing is all around, around these APIs. If we can get to the point whereby we can have like standard plugins at an industry level for various different sort of platforms. Let's say, for
Hmm.
example, like you've got any workflow platform or some sort of, your standard sort of Ansibles, Terraforms, etc. of
Right.
the world, whereby you can find a NaaS control plugin in one of those that was able to basically help enterprises and our customers do automation. Well, that to me is where we want to land. I'm not sure we want to provide like full on automation
Hmm.
tools, but just like plugins to enable our
Right.
stuff to be used next to other things as well, because it's never network for network's sake. It's always network to get traffic from one place to another, right? So
Right.
we need to make sure we're playing in that same ecosystem that all of
Hmm.
those different parties are also playing in.
Yeah, no, that is actually really interesting. That's kind of not where I expected you to go with that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Yeah,
I'm
excellent.
glad I surprised you at least once on this
Yeah,
conversation.
that's right. Yeah, well, especially because we've talked about a lot of this stuff a fair bit before too. So it's good, and good to stay on these sort of bleeding edge topics to see where things are going to develop. So on that note, Fahim, to kind of wrap us up, what do you think needs to happen? Right, what is it going to take for enterprises to move into these directions that we've been talking about for NaaS adoption, basically to ramp up?
I think the automation agenda. I mean, to be quite, I think it's just going to naturally happen. I don't think
Hmm.
there's any specific actions that the enterprises need to
Right.
take. The whole movement to cloud kind of sort of kicks
Hmm.
this stuff off, and a successful sort of cloud transformation project is usually going to be the thing that's going to trigger off the conversation. Well, actually, if we can do this for compute and applications, why can't we do it for more stuff than this? And
Hmm.
I think that that's going to be a natural thing to do. I think that the key thing from an operator's perspective is the fact that we have robust platforms with a wide range of capability and also a lot of interconnect to other platforms, clouds, and various other bits and pieces, internet exchanges, and the whole
Hmm.
shebang, as well as being able to support this connectivity other uh, to other sort of locations which are not on the NAS, right? So stuff which
Right.
is still connected, but not necessarily on the NAS. So I think sort of all of the coming together of all of this stuff will actually naturally cause it to happen. I just think that
Hmm.
when it comes to network procurement is kind of very, very far behind compute, other infrastructure, compute
Right.
infrastructure procurement and the such like, and it's just going to be a case of, well, network will eventually catch up. Or if we don't catch up, somebody else will do something over the top that's going to make us irrelevant. But hopefully
Right.
we'll catch up
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's kind of where we want to end up.
Hmm. No, that's I think that is really fascinating in the sense that what you're saying is ultimately this isn't about sort of how we entice the enterprise, how we move towards what the enterprise needs. It's about shoring up the back end, right? It's about
Yes.
that wholesale ecosystem sort of finding its automation, and then what the enterprise needs will sort of emerge from that. I think that actually
Absolutely.
makes
Just
a
come out in the wash. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, exactly. That makes a good deal of sense. Yeah, excellent. So, Fahim, to wrap things up, what are you looking at in 2025 in these sort of developments, sort of in the near term? What are you hoping that maybe next fall when we meet at the MEF or something, and that we can review then?
So, I mean, yeah. So I mean, going back to the whole sort of green agenda, one of the things that's kind of interesting at the moment is, being able to route traffic around our network according to sort of very sort of specific customer
Mm,
intents, if you like. So, I
hmm.
want the greenest route based upon energy consumption, based upon where the power is coming from.
Right.
How renewable it is versus, how much of it isn't. I want it to be sovereign. I want, this whole idea of being able to express constraints over our networks to say that
Right.
the NaaS service is then able to automatically reroute as it needs to, just basically to meet those requirements. I think that we'll start to see a lot more of that, and that's kind of related not just to the whole NaaS topic, but also the segment routing and various other
Hmm.
bits of it that are actually kind of playing out on people's networks. And the other big topic, and it feels really boring to constantly say it, but I'm going to say it again. It's integration and the emergence of more NaaS
Yeah.
providers as well. I think that we'll see more carriers get into the NaaS space, and I think that the integration conversations will start to turn a little bit more serious
Right.
once we have them there.
No, I think that is exactly the right point, honestly, and it's where as telegeography we're thinking through, how do we continue to cover the sort of network in light of the massive changes in the WAN and network automation, and part of the answer there, truly, the foundation of the answer is looking at that sort of carrier to carrier co-opetition model, and how that develops over this period. I think is still going to be the foundation of it's all. Back to your EV analogy, right? So it wasn't really about building the coolest car or whatever. It was the foundation of that was building a better lithium battery, right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So,
absolutely,
yeah, and
100%.
now it's about building a charging network so that these cool cars can actually be driven more than a few miles away from your point of origin, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Although in the UK, a few miles actually is probably all the way across the country
yeah,
compared to
yeah.
compared to the US.
The family truckster definitions or needs in the US is very different than in the UK,
Yeah,
certainly. So, yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
totally.
Excellent. All right. So on that note, everybody listening has their remit, right? It's make our industry work more efficiently towards these goals, right? It's just a little job for everybody to take on, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, it's just a weekend's worth of work.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Vadim. This was super illuminating. If folks want to keep up with you, is there a place they can find you and what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean LinkedIn. That's one
Hmm.
where I am more than anywhere else. Always interested in having discussions, but please, yeah, write to me. Yeah, definitely
Yeah,
interested in talking about this. Try not
that's
to call me Sabir. I mean,
yeah.
it's not my
That's
preference,
right.
but
Well,
uh,
answer to
yeah, that's my
anything, right?
dad's
Yeah, yeah.
name.
It's funny because with the LinkedIn point that obviously I always ask people this question, and very often the answer is LinkedIn. It's going through tumultuous time in terms of the social media world right now, right? I think LinkedIn might be the last one standing in a certain sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
exactly. The last
very
safe place.
ironic. Yeah,
That's
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, excellent.
it.
All right. Well,
All
yeah,
right.
thank you so much. I look forward to talking again soon, perhaps in person one of these days. So, yeah.
Nice one. Thanks very much, Greg.
All right.
Appreciate this.
Cheers. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.